Good day, everyone. Our topic for today is Rule 119. Rule 119 of the Revised Rule of Criminal Procedure talks about trial. So, when shall trial be done? In Section 1, it says there after a plea of not guilty is entered, the accused shall have at least 15 days to prepare for trial. The trial shall commence within 30 days from receipt of the pretrial order. Now, take note that we have there the guidelines for continuous trial in criminal cases. And you've learned that the arraignment and pretrial are done on the same day as a rule. Now, after that setting, you have there 15 days to prepare for trial, and it shall commence within 30 days from receipt of the pretrial order. Remember the pretrial order, which contains the stipulations and admissions of the parties, that it has to be reduced into writing, signed by both accused and counsel, in order to be binding. So they have to be furnished a copy of the pretrial order. So at least within 30 days from receipt of the pre-trial order. Now, the slides are actually incorporating already the provisions on the continuous trial rule on the guidelines of the continuous trial in criminal cases. So in section 2, it provides that trial shall be continuous until terminated. And there are also postponements that comes along the way. But how do we treat them? As the same shall be filed during trial. Once trial commence, shall continue from day to day as far as practicable until terminated. Now, if you notice, the rules provides as far as practicable. Why? Now, please take notice as well that in each court, there are different limitation that the court is actually uh, confronting with. Different court may have peculiar conditions that are not also applicable in another case. Now, for my court, for that matter, the public prosecutor appears only twice a month. Okay, that's twice a month. So if that is the case, then possibly we cannot adapt this trial to continue until terminated. That's why the use of the term there as far as practicable. Maybe this is applicable in city courts where that particular court has a resident public prosecutor that is assigned to that particular court only. But then they as well have different circumstances. There are offices wherein there are only one or two of them, and they have to attend too many court hearings for that matter. So these actually are limitations confronting us in observance with a continuous trial rule. So let's just say that it is practical, it is applicable. It may be postponed for a reasonable period of time for good cause. The court shall, after consultation with the prosecutor and defense counsel, set the case for continuous trial on a weekly or other short-term trial calendar at the earliest possible time so as to ensure speedy trial. In no case shall the entire trial period exceed 180 days from the first day of trial, except as otherwise authorized by the Supreme Court. Now take note, this shall commence on the first day of trial, meaning to say after the arraignment and pre-trial. The time limitations provided under this section and the preceding section shall not apply where special laws or circulars of the Supreme Court provide for a shorter period of trial. Trial shall be held from Monday to Thursday, and courts shall call the cases exactly at 8:30 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Hearing on motions, arraignment and pretrial, and promulgations of decisions shall be held in the morning of Fridays. So again, as what I have mentioned earlier, this is very applicable if you have there a resident prosecutor exclusively for that court only. What is not included in the 180 days? The following periods of delay shall be excluded in computing the time within which trial must commence. Any period of delay resulting from other proceeding concerning the accused, including but not limited to the following: delay resulting from an examination of the physical and mental condition of the accused. So, meaning to say, if the accused is suffering or suspected to be suffering from mental illness, basically the trial shall be suspended. The trial cannot proceed because the accused there also has their constitutional rights that we have to consider, not only the rule provided for the continuous trial. So basically, it would call for the suspension of trial. Delay from proceeding with respect to other criminal charges against the accused. Now, we could also say that some of the accused there are not also exclusive with a particular court. Okay? So, some of them are actually facing many charges, more than one charge, and pending before different courts. Now, to illustrate this one, it was during the pandemic wherein the trial was done VCH. So because it's VCH, there is no need for us to travel. There is no need for us to go to court physically. We are thinking that it would be easier for the counsels or the prosecutor or the PAO for that matter to appear to a particular hearing because it's just VCH. But it so happened on one instance, I was amused because it's not only that the counsels are actually busy at the time, appearing from one VCH to another VCH. You also have there the accused because the result there is that all the courts are scheduling for VCH trials. So at one point, the accused was not able to attend to our hearing because he was in another VCH. So that would also call for suspension or let's say a postponement of the proceeding because the accused there is actually um, attending another trial. Delay resulting from extraordinary remedies against interlocutory orders. What does this mean? Now, take note that if the court issues an interlocutory order, that interlocutory order is not appealable, but the aggrieved party may file a special civil action for certiorari. So that would be an extraordinary remedy against interlocutory order. For how long shall it be resolved? Only the High Court can tell. Delay resulting from pre-trial proceeding provided that the delay does not exceed 30 days. So it could be possible that during pre-trial it was reset or there was continuance on the part of the proceeding because it may involve voluminous documents, for example. So it could be one of the reason. Delay resulting from orders of inhibition or proceedings relating to change of venue of cases or transfer from other courts. So basically, if there is an order calling for the inhibition of particular judge, especially if it is multi-sala, then it has to go through the raffle of the case to which it was inhibited by the judge who originally handles the particular case. So it may cause the delay. Delay resulting from finding of existence of prejudicial question. Now, we had prejudicial question when we had Rule 111. So basically, the criminal case should be suspended pending determination of the prejudicial question in a civil case. Delay reasonably attributable to any period not to exceed 30 days during which any proceeding concerning the accused is actually under advisement. So for as long as there is emotion to suspend, so the possible thing that I could think of this one is that let us say that the accused let's say, filed a petition for review or appeal before the secretary. So he may file a motion to suspend the proceeding. Now, any period of delay resulting from the absence or unavailability of an essential witness. Now, take note you already have learned who an essential witness is. Either we've known the location of the essential witness, but he does not appear in court, or we really does not know the name of this particular witness. Not the name, but the address of this particular witness. So it may be excluded from the counting because we cannot just at one instance dismiss the case because of the failure of the prosecution to present this particular essential witness. So that would also be arbitrary on the part of the prosecution. For purposes of this paragraph, an essential witness shall be considered absent when his whereabouts are unknown or his whereabouts cannot be determined by due diligence. So for as long as it is not arbitrary, it is not intentional to cause the delay of the proceeding, it can be done. He shall be considered unavailable whenever his whereabouts are known, but his presence for trial cannot be obtained by due diligence. Then you also have there any period of delay resulting from the mental incompetence or physical inability of the accused to stand trial. So maybe at the time of trial, that's the time that he became incompetent or physically unable to attend to trial or to stand trial, then basically it calls for the suspension of trial. If the information is dismissed upon motion of the prosecution and thereafter a charge is filed against the accused for the same offense, any period of delay from the date of charge was dismissed to the date the time of limitation would commence to run as to the subsequent charge had there been no previous charge. So it shall be included in the counting of the 180 days. A reasonable period of delay when the accused is joined for trial with a co-accused over whom the court has not acquired jurisdiction or as to whom the time for trial has not run and a motion for separate trial has been granted. Now, this presupposes that there are co-accused who were at large. So sometimes the hearing is not set because of the absence of the other accused. Because sometimes if we are to take separate hearings for this co-accused, it would entail much of the resources of the government. So since they are co-accused, the prosecution shall be presenting the same evidence against all of them, then consolidated trial or joint trial is practical. But in this particular case, especially if another instance, you have there the accused who were subjected for an inquest proceeding. So basically, those at large shall be subjected for preliminary investigation. So sometimes it would be practical that we'll wait for a little while until such time that the other accused shall be arrested so that they all shall be tried during the same hearing. But at any rate, it is your right as the accused to file a motion for separate trial because you have your right there to speedy disposition of your case. Any period of delay resulting from a continuance granted by the court motu proprio or on motion either by the accused or his counsel or the prosecution if the court granted a continuance on the basis of its findings set forth in the order that the ends of justice served by taking such action outweigh the best interest of the public and the accused in a speedy trial. What do we mean by continuance? So you have there a hearing, and then the counsel, a party for that matter, either the prosecution or the accused, ask for a continuance, meaning to say, Your Honor, can we stop at this juncture and we shall continue on another date? So that is the continuance being referred to there under the said paragraph. Section 4 shows us the factors in allowing a continuance of the trial. The following factors, among others, shall be considered by a court in determining whether to grant a continuance under Section 3F of this rule. Whether or not the failure to grant a continuance in the proceeding would likely make a continuation of such proceeding impossible or result in a miscarriage of justice. This would mean that if the court would allow the continuance, would it still be possible for this particular witness, essential witness for that matter, to come back to court? Or if the court would not grant the continuance, would it result to miscarriage because this witness who failed to bring this particular important document be deprived of presenting it to court? So that would be example of the factors to consider under paragraph A. Whether or not the case taken as a whole is so novel, unusual, and complex due to the number of accused or the nature of the prosecution, or that it is unreasonable to expect adequate preparation within the periods of time established therein. So, to illustrate this paragraph, due to the number of accused. I can cite you as an example. I have there a PD 1602 case. There are actually many accused. Some of them pleaded guilty, but some did not. And this accused who did not, let's say 7 in number, had their respective counsels. So when the particular witness is presented by the prosecution, all these counsels of the accused will cross-examine the witness. Now, if we would not grant a continuance, that would mean depriving the other accused, counsels for the accused, to cross-examine the particular witness because there are so many of them and it would really eat up the time of the court. And there are also other cases to be called. So that would be an example. In addition, no continuance under Section 3F of this rule shall be granted because of congestion of the court's calendar or lack of diligent preparation or failure to obtain available witnesses on the part of the prosecutor. So, to give opportunity on the part of the prosecutor to present their evidence, weighing the right of the accused to speedy trial. Now, there are also instances wherein the prosecution really had a hard time securing the the witnesses. Now, it is understandable if the prosecution cannot present evidence because the parties already have settled amicably. So usually we do not dismiss the case right away, especially if the parties did not appear during trial. No problem if the parties are present, because what I do usually in my court is just to present the private complainant to the witness stand and testifying, desisting that he is already he already have settled with the accused and they have patched up their issues and he is no longer interested in further prosecuting. At least we have their direct evidence that the prosecution has no witness to present other than the recanting private complainant or Sometimes the private complainant may no longer appear, and you have there the accused. If we are to dismiss it provisionally, it has to be done with the consent of the accused. So the problem is if the accused also does not appear anymore in court. So to whose consent are we getting? So usually we set it on 3 calendar days, and if the prosecution still cannot present any evidence, then we are justified in dismissing it for failure to prosecute. For purposes of postponement, the following are meritorious grounds. Acts of God. You have their force majeure. Physical inability of the witness to appear and testify. Now, with respect to acts of God, force majeure, these are really beyond our control. So, those are meritorious ground for postponement. But with respect to physical inability, let us say because for health reason, you need to justify it with your medical certificate. And of course, you have their postponement fee. And as a rule under the continuous trial rule, during the pre-trial, the court already have settled and appearing in the pretrial order, the witness has to be presented on each of the prosecution or the accused, and trial dates are likewise set during the pretrial. So if ever there is that postponement granted, that postponement shall be deducted from the allowable trial dates set already during pre-trial and still subject to postponement fee. Meaning to say, if it is deducted to the dates previously agreed upon, the prosecution or the accused has to still stick to the period given to them within which to present their witnesses. Examples of prohibited grounds were continuance, congestion of court's calendar. That's why the court has to schedule manage their calendar in such a way that all the cases they're calendared during the trial or during the day has to be accommodated. Lack of diligent preparation, failure to obtain available witnesses on the part of the prosecution. Now take note, we have there the so-called one-day examination rule. What's the purpose? Now, sometimes it's so hard, especially to an essential witness. Let us say that the prosecution has a hard time securing the attendance of an essential witness. You have to finish him on that day. He has to be presented on direct, cross-examined, redirect, re-cross-examined. Because if he would not be finished on the day, there is no guarantee that he will come back to court to testify. And what would be the significance if the witness testified and he was not subjected to cross-examination because he did not appear anymore? Significance there is that it may be the court may order, it may order the striking off from the records the testimony of the witness because he was not duly cross-examined. Now, sometimes you also have their lawyers who would not cross-examine the witness on the same day. And they would ask that the cross-examination of this witness be done on the next setting. The court also has to make a stand that maybe this particular counsel just want to buy time, especially if they would be thinking that this witness would not be coming back anymore, or this witness will not come back anymore. We will uh, um, convince him not to come back. What would be the consequence? Of course, as what I have stated, the direct testimony of the witness may be ordered stricken off from the record. So usually, as a precautionary measure, some of the counsels are so clever enough to that move that the accused be warned. Because if the accused has opportunity to cross-examine the witness and the witness was not able to come back for his cross-examination, they will be barred from moving for the striking of their testimony of the witness because he was not cross-examined. That is one of the precautionary measure. Okay, so you can do that. Time limit following an order for new trial. So let us say that if the accused is to be tried again pursuant to an order for new trial, the trial shall commence within 30 days from notice of the order, provided that if the period becomes impractical due to unavailability of the witnesses and other factors, the court may extend but not to exceed 180 days. For the second 12-month period, the time limit shall be 180 days from notice of said order of new trial. What does this mean? Let us say that there is that order of the trial court. And let us say that the order, let's say dismissal of the trial court was questioned to the appellate court, and the appellate court granted the appeal or the certiorari directing the trial court to conduct new trial. That is the scenario there, one of the scenario. So because of the order of the appellate court, then the lower court has the obligation to comply with the order of the appellate court. Judge, would it mean that the right of the accused against double jeopardy be violated because basically we will be conducting a new trial after the same was dismissed? No, in a sense that usually the reason there, one of the reason there to order for the new trial because of the decision done by the trial court. The appellate court may order the new trial, impliedly saying that the previous trial conducted by the trial court is considered void ab initio, especially if it is certiorari. There was grave abuse of discretion on the part of the trial court who dismissed the case. So since there was grave abuse, it nullifies the proceeding. So double jeopardy does not set in. Extended time limit, notwithstanding the provision of Section 1G, Rule 116 of the preceding section. This is during the transition with respect to the effectivity of the guidelines of continuous trial in criminal cases. So that's why you have there the period. Section 7. If the public attorney assigned to defend a person charged with a crime knows that the latter is preventively detained, either because he is charged with a bailable crime but has no means to post bail, or is charged with a non-bailable crime, or is serving a term of imprisonment in any penal institution, it shall be his duty to do the following: shall promptly undertake to obtain the presence of the prisoner for trial, or cause a notice to be served on the person having custody of the prisoner, requiring such person to so advise the prisoner of his right and demand trial. Now, this is so significant during the COVID time, wherein cases are piling up because of the pandemic and because of the volume of the pending cases during that time. It has compiled. So some had there the initiative to motion to set the case for trial or motion to set the case for hearing, for example, in order to be given priority during the conduct of the hearing. Upon receipt of that notice, the custodian of the prisoner shall promptly advise the prisoner of the charge and of his right to demand trial. If at any time thereafter the prisoner informs his custodian that he demands such trial, the latter shall cause notice to that effect to be sent promptly to the public attorney. Upon receipt of such notice, the public attorney shall promptly seek to obtain the presence of the prisoner for trial. When the custodian of the prisoner receives from the public attorney a properly supported request for the availability of the prisoner for purpose of trial, the prisoner shall made available accordingly. So basically, this is for the preparation of the necessary motion. Sanction. In any case in which private counsel for the accused, public attorney, or the prosecutor knowingly allows the case to be set for trial without disclosing that a necessary witness would be unavailable for trial, or files a motion solely for delay which he knows is totally frivolous and without merit, make a statement for the purpose of obtaining continuance which he knows to be false and which is material to the granting of continuance, or willfully fails to proceed to trial without justification consistent with the provision hereof, the court may punish such counsel, attorney, or prosecutor as follows. So meaning to say, what does this mean? If you have there unmeritorious postponement, the counsel privately retained by the accused shall be fined 20,000 pesos. If he is appointed as counsel de officio or a public attorney or a prosecutor, he shall be fined 5,000 pesos. By denying any defense counsel or prosecutor the right to practice before the court trying the case for a period not exceeding 30 days, the punishment provided for by this section shall be without prejudice to any appropriate criminal action or other sanction authorized under these rules. Now, you have to remember, you may be the public prosecutor, you may be the public attorney. Aside from the fact that you are counsel for the private complainant or the accused respectively, first and foremost, you are an officer of the court. You have to act with all honesty and diligence. You are an officer of the court. You must not delay any man's cause. You are an officer of the court to which you should not do any falsehood. Okay, so that is your responsibility. So aside from the fine, the court may ban, okay, deny you right to practice in that particular court. Remedy where accused is not brought to trial within the time limit. If the accused is not brought to trial within the time limit, the information may be dismissed on motion of the accused on the ground of denial of his right to speedy trial. The accused shall have the burden of proving the motion, but the prosecution shall have the burden of going forward with the evidence to establish the exclusion of time under Section 3 of this rule. The dismissal shall be subject to the rules on double jeopardy. Why? Because if the case was previously dismissed on ground of violation of the right of the accused to speedy trial, that dismissal is on the merits, meaning to say it cannot be refiled. Otherwise, that shall constitute a violation of the right of the accused to speedy trial. Okay, so failure of the accused to move for dismissal prior to trial shall constitute a waiver of the right to dismiss under this section. Again, dismissal on the ground of speedy trial is tantamount to acquittal, that is dismissal on the merits. Aside from the right of the accused to speedy trial under the rules, you also have there the constitutional provision on the right of the accused to speedy trial. No provision of law on speedy trial and no rule implementing the same shall be interpreted as a bar to any charge or denial of the right to speedy trial guaranteed by the 1987 Constitution. Order of trial, basically, I already presented this to you before. So under ordinary circumstances, the prosecution shall present evidence first to prove the charge, meaning to say the prosecution has to prove all the elements of the crime and in proper case, the civil liability. The accused may present evidence to prove his defense and damages. So this is already the outline. So after the prosecution shall rest its case, then the accused will present evidence to prove the defense and damages, if any, arising from the issuance of a provisional remedy in a case. Take note, may present evidence. Why is it that the rules uses the term may. Meaning to say, it's not mandatory. It is discretionary. Why? Because you have there the right to remain silent on the part of the accused as guaranteed under the Constitution. What does this mean? Damages arising from the issuance of a provisional remedy. To cite you as an example, so you have there a case for staffa against a particular accused, and because of that, the prosecution may move for the attachment of your properties. So attachment there, preliminary attachment is one of the provisional remedy. And because the property has been attached, you actually has been deprived as the lawful owner of the attached property. So for example, you will be deprived of um disposing it because it is being attached. And because of that deprivation, you suffer damages, for example. So in that particular case, when it's your time to present evidence, you may present evidence that what the private complainant did, you suffer damages as well. The prosecution and the defense may, in that order, present rebuttal and so rebuttal evidence unless the court, in furtherance of justice, permits them to present additional evidence bearing upon the main issue. So after the accused is done presenting its evidence, it rests its case, the prosecution may present rebuttal, and the accused may also present rebuttal evidence before the same shall be submitted for decision. Upon admission of evidence of the parties, the case shall be deemed submitted for decision unless the court directs them to argue orally or to submit written memoranda. Now, take note, shall be deemed submitted unless the court directs them to argue or to submit written memoranda. This is actually discretionary because with or without the memoranda, and in fact, even if the court directs them to submit memoranda, the submission there of the memoranda is actually not mandatory. Hence, it would not stop the running of the period within which the court has to decide a case within a period of 30 or 90 days, as the case may be. When the court admits the act or omission charged in the complaint or information but interposes a lawful defense, the order of trial may be modified. So this is what we call as reverse trial if the accused admitted the commission of the crime but invokes self-defense. So there may be reverse trial. So that is what we call as order of trial may be modified. Section 12. When the accused has been held to answer for an offense, he may, upon motion with notice to the other parties, have witnesses conditionally examined in his behalf. The motion shall state the name and residence of the witness, the substance of his testimony, that the witness is sick or infirm to afford reasonable ground for believing that he will not be able to attend the trial, or resides more than 100 kilometers from the place of trial and has no means to attend the same, or that other similar circumstances exist that would make him unavailable to prevent him from attending the trial. The motion shall be supported by the affidavit of the accused and such other evidence as the court may require. Meaning to say, yes, you have there the right to conditionally examine the witness because he might not be available anymore when he will be set to testify to the court because he is so sick. He might not be still be alive during that time. That would be a very um, reasonable ground to grant for the conditional examination. But you need to substantiate by affidavit of the accused and such other evidence as the court may require, because this is not a matter of right that you can demand from the court. You have to substantiate. How to examine a defense witness in Section 13. If the court is satisfied that the examination of a witness for the accused is necessary, An order shall be made directing that the witness be examined at a specific date, time, and place, and that a copy of the order be served on the prosecutor at least 3 days before the scheduled examination. Now, this examination of witness is provided under Section 13. This is what we called as deposition taking in civil cases. Okay? Deposition taking. The examination shall be taken before a judge or, if not practicable, a member of the bar in good standing, so designated by the judge in the order, or if the order be made by a court of superior jurisdiction, before an inferior court to be designated therein. The examination shall proceed notwithstanding the absence of the prosecutor, provided he was duly notified of the hearing. A written record of the testimony shall be taken. Now, what shall be done in the deposition taking? There was actually there is no schedule yet for the hearing. What is being scheduled is the conditional examination of the witness. But basically, the prosecutor has to be there because after the direct testimony of the defense witness or the accused himself, the prosecutor shall be given opportunity to cross-examine the witness. Now, if despite notice the prosecutor did not attend the examination as ordered by the court, then that constitutes a waiver of the right to cross-examine. So after the deposition taking, it shall be put by the stenographer in a sealed envelope, okay, until such time that it shall be presented to the court if the accused or the defense still wants it to be presented. So it has to move for the opening of the sealed envelope containing the transcript of stenographic note taken during the deposition or the conditional examination of the witness. Now, there are instances where bail shall be required upon a material witness so that the court will be guaranteed that this particular witness has to come back to court in case continuance under reasonable grounds is granted. When the court is satisfied upon proof of oath that a material witness will not testify when required, it may, upon motion of either party, order the witness to post bail in such sum as may be deemed proper. Upon refusal to post bail, the court shall commit him to prison until he complies or is legally discharged after his testimony has been taken. Now, if the defense has the right to may ask for the conditional examination of a witness, same with the prosecution. When it is satisfactorily appears that a witness for the prosecution is too sick or infirm to appear at the trial as directed by the court or has to leave the Philippines with no definite date of returning, he may forthwith be conditionally examined before the court where the case is pending. Such examination in the presence of the accused or in his absence after reasonable notice to attend the examination has been served on him shall be conducted in the same manner as the examination at the trial. Failure or refusal of the accused to attend examination after notice shall be considered a waiver. Just like the prosecutor earlier, the statement taken may be admitted in behalf of or against the accused. Section 16 talks about trial of several accused. When two or more accused are jointly charged with an offense, they shall be tried jointly unless the court in its discretion and upon motion of the prosecutor or any accused orders separate trial for one or more accused. Now, this is specifically true if this several accused has different defense, because some of the accused their participation might be minuet and the others are so complicated that would mean it entails days or long trial for that particular defense of one accused, depriving the other accused of the right to speedy trial. Because basically, if we are to conduct a joint trial for all of them, they cannot present witnesses together. They shall present each evidence one after the other. Thereby, it may be um, strenuous on the part of those accused that their participation is so simple, not complicated. What is trial in absentia? Now, you've heard it from me many times. Trial in absentia is done, especially to those who accused who already have jumped bail, provided the court already has acquired jurisdiction over the person of the accused. So after arraignment, they do not appear anymore. The trial can proceed in absentia. An accused need not be present always in every hearing. Remember, he has the right to confront. But if he is absent despite notice, then that would mean he is waiving his right to be present during trial. For as long as the following requisites concur: that the accused had already been arraigned, that the accused had been duly notified of the trial or hearings, the absence of the accused or his failure to appear is unjustified. So since we are talking of trial in absentia, what are the instances where presence of the accused is required? I know you already have heard it from me already many times. At arraignment and plea, because presence of the accused there is mandatory, because he has to personally enter his plea, whether he is guilty or not guilty. Second is during trial, when it is necessary for identification. Because aside from proving all the elements of the crime, the prosecution also needs to prove that the accused is the perpetrator of the crime. That's why he needs to be identified. And lastly, but not the least, his presence during the promulgation of sentence. And take note of there, unless it is for a light offense, in which case the accused may appear by counsel or representative. That's why, if it is a light offense, the accused may be absent. But the problem there is, if you are absent during promulgation, especially if you will be convicted, no problem if it is acquittal. Okay? Because acquittal, you have nothing to do with it. You don't need to do anything after the acquittal. But if you are convicted, of course, you will lose your standing before the court. Meaning to say, you may be deprived of the remedies available to you to avail of the remedies after conviction, because either you will file an appeal or you will file a probation or community service, especially if, because the law says, unless it is for a light offense. If it's light offense, you may file, you have their 15 days within which the conviction becomes final. So either way, you have to manifest to the court that you wanted, that the justification why you failed to appear during the promulgation. And since you are convicted, you wanted to avail of this particular remedy. Okay? So that you will regain your legal standing in court. Discharge of accused as a state witness. Section 17. When two or more persons are jointly charged with the commission of any offense, upon motion of the prosecution before resting its case, the court may direct one or more of the accused to be discharged with their consent so that they may be witnesses for the state when, after requiring the prosecution to present evidence and the sworn statement of each proposed state witness at the hearing in support of the discharge, the court is satisfied that there is absolute necessity for the testimony of the accused whose discharge is requested. There is no other evidence, direct evidence available for the proper prosecution of the offense committed except the testimony of said accused. The testimony of said accused can be substantially corroborated in its material points. Said accused does not appear to be the most guilty, and said accused has not at any time been convicted of any offense involving moral turpitude. Now, when we say discharge of accused to be a state witness, this presupposes that there are more than one accused in a case. Now I also mentioned, or you were taught during your CRIM 1, that the direct evidence to prove conspiracy is the testimony of one of the accused. Okay? The direct evidence of conspiracy is is the testimony of one of the accused. Why? Because he is part of the conspiracy. He is part of the planning on the commission of the crime. So the testimony of one of the accused is the direct evidence proving conspiracy. Now, a witness sought to be discharged has to comply all these five requisites. Okay, all these five requisites. He must not be um there is absolute necessity for the testimony of the accused. There is no direct evidence, meaning to say there is really that missing link to prove. Maybe the prosecution was able to prove circumstantial, but then they have to prove that missing link, and that only this particular co-accused can prove the same. That his testimony can be substantially corroborated in its material points, meaning to say it's very substantial to connect all this circumstantial evidence. The accused must not appear to be the most guilty, and he must not have been at any time convicted of any offense involving moral turpitude. Absence of one of these requisites, then that discharge of the accused as a state witness shall not be granted by the court. Evidence adduced in support of the discharge shall automatically form part of the trial. If the court denies the motion for discharge of the accused, a state witness, his sworn statement shall be inadmissible in evidence. Why? Because that would violate his right against self-incrimination. Because basically in his affidavit, he will be admitting there the commission of the crime. So if he will not be discharged as a state witness, then that affidavit is incriminating, which is violative of his constitutional right against self-incrimination. So that shall be inadmissible in evidence. Now we are talking of crimes involving moral turpitude. So what are the crimes involving moral turpitude? Meaning to say, if the accused has been previously convicted of any of these crimes, then he cannot be admitted as a state witness. Abduction, bigamy, concubinage, smuggling, rape. We have their staffa, attempted bribery, profiteering, robbery, murder, staffa, theft, illicit sexual relations, violation of BP 22, falsification, intriguing against honor, violation of the anti-fencing law, violation of the Dangerous Drugs Act, perjury, forgery, direct bribery, frustrated homicide. Now, take note that these are based on decided cases already, and this list is not exclusive. Okay? So, if you are admitted as state witness, basically that operates as an acquittal on the part of the witness of the accused who was taken as a state witness. Now, Judge, what if, yes, he was allowed, granted by the court to be a state witness, however, when he was called to testify, he changed his mind. His testimony is not favorable anymore to the prosecution. His discharge shall be nullified. He will be backed as one of the co-accused. Okay, so you also have there the case of Zari versus Flores, basically enumerating the crimes involving moral turpitude. Okay, so that's all for now. On the next setting, we'll proceed with section 18. So thank you for your time and be safe always.